Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 4 of our story tonight, where all the pieces of the puzzle come together. And we're going to find out where a Bigfoot fits into the story, of course. But what an extraordinary story. We've learnt that Mrs. Kramer believes that there is a ghost in her house. She never believed that before, but somebody was looking at her when she was bathing in her bath. And so now she's got a friend of hers who was sharing a bed with her that night, claimed to have seen a ghost looking at her. And they believe that they have a spectre in their home, and they're about to call a psychic and medium around the house to investigate, because that's what they think has been going on. They used to hear the rumblings in the attic, and Mrs. Kramer used to believe that it was rats. Now she's thinking that maybe in fact her house is haunted. But the haunting is not coming from a ghost, we know that. There's a young man who is fixated about Mrs. Kramer, and he's hiding out in the attic. He's not perverse in his intentions towards Mrs. Kramer. He's fixated and in love with this woman, just totally enchanted by her. And he's hiding out in the attic because he wants to feel close to this woman. So let's find out where the story takes us. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with part 4 of our story tonight. I hate to say this to you, but I think your house is haunted, Chantel, she insisted. I saw a ghost last night, no doubt about it at all. I'm telling you, I did. Mrs. Kramer at first almost laughed, fobbing the idea of her house being haunted as being ludicrously ridiculous. But then she suddenly became a lot more serious and solemn, as she stopped to think more carefully about Fee's words. Well, I suppose this is a very old house, isn't it? She admitted. But I can't say I've ever believed in ghosts before. But then again, after the shadow I saw last night while I was bathing in the vaporous mist, well, it's now giving me pause for thought. I mean, there was no sign of a break-in in my home, was there? Maybe my intruder was not of the worldly kind, so to speak. That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you, you silly old mutt, said Fee. All this time you thought you were being spooked by an intruder. And yes, you were. But you had no way of knowing the intruder was a ghostly apparition of all things. No wonder the police couldn't find any signs of a break-in. It makes sense to me now. Your house is haunted, Chantel. I'm telling you, it is haunted. And that ghost communicated with you by writing on the bathroom mist in the mirror. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's seriously creepy. I think you have a ghost that might possibly have a crush on you. Either that or the ghost is trying to communicate with you in some way, to let you become aware of his presence. I say him because I think it's a male energy. He obviously wants to be noticed. I hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but I saw that ghost last night, and nothing you could say could persuade me to think any differently. He was giving off this bluish light, let me tell you, like the night light in the passage. As I was saying, I saw him so quickly and so briefly, and then he vanished the way ghosts always do. So yes, Chantel, your house is definitely haunted. Goodness gracious, Mrs. Kramer had said, her eyes widening. I do believe you're right, Fee. A ghost could have locked my dog in the kitchen and written high in the mist on my bathroom mirror. I've heard of things like that happening to people before with paranormal activity. I've just paid those things no heed. But what has been happening around my house of late is a big wake-up call to me. So I can't dismiss the paranormal claims out of hand. I definitely saw a humanoid shadow looking at me when I was in the bath. So now when I begin to connect the dots, the only thing that makes sense to me is that this house has to be haunted, and that dark, shadowy, human-like silhouette I saw was probably a ghost, or maybe even a shadow person. And thank God he doesn't appear to be threatening. I suppose I should have listened to Ella, really. She's got an instinct about these things, you know. That daughter of mine is as sharp as a hawk. I should pay more attention to what she says from now on. What are you saying, Chantel? You're talking about Ella being so intuitive and so sharp. Has she claimed to feel the ghost's presence around this house? Why didn't you tell me about any of this? Well, there was nothing to tell, said Mrs. Kramer, because she hasn't physically seen anything, has she? But she's believed for quite a while there might be a ghost residing in the attic. She's been insistent that she's heard boots walking up and down the attic at night. I assumed she just heard rats scurrying around above her head. But now I'm not so sure. I wonder if she's been right all along. I've been dismissing her suggestions out of hand as completely ludicrous and over the top. But now I'm beginning to doubt myself, I have to admit. That's it, Chantel. Maybe that is where the entity is hanging out, said Fee, growing excited. Think about it. The attic is creepy and very dark. A ghost would feel very at home in a place like that. I tell you what I'll do. I'll contact that psychic medium my friend Trudy was telling me about. She called the woman around to her house. She was convinced her home was haunted. It was making so many noises at night. Turns out it was her old pipes. But old houses do make noises, you know. Anyway, Trudy's got the detail of this medium. We'll get her to take a look at the attic for us and, of course, look at the whole house. See if she can pick up any energy. So while the chatting was going on in the kitchen with the two women getting quite heated up on the subject of ghosts, I surreptitiously made my way out of the house. Before I'd left the attic, of course, I made sure I'd cleaned up after myself, to hide any evidence of my presence, or that anybody had been living up there. As then the psychic would tell Mrs. Kramer, she didn't have a ghost in her house, but she did have a human kind, if you know what I mean. Some creepy guy who had decided to move into her house and had been living in her attic all the time. Rather like Anne Frank lived in the attic during the Second World War, to hide from the Germans. Once I'd left the attic, I slipped out of Mrs. Kramer's sliding door that led into the backyard. I could hear the two women yapping away excitedly in the kitchen, while Big Boy, the forever silent observer, watched me leave the house without so much as barking. I made my way to the end of the yard, where I cautiously climbed over the fence and scrambled down the public walking trail. And then, when I finally reached the trail, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I'd safely made it out of Mrs. Kramer's house without being observed. I had my computer in its bag, and my backpack containing my sleeping bag and pillow, and all my other belongings. 20 minutes later I arrived at home. I knew, of course, the psychic medium that Fee had called would soon be checking out the Kramers' residence, and probably the attic as well. And certainly if I got caught as a stowaway in the attic, the police would get involved, and I would be in a whole heap of trouble. People would likely refer to me as a pervert, but I felt no guilt at the time, for there was nothing obscene or dirty about my feelings towards Mrs. Kramer. My attraction towards the woman was more than a sexual thing. It was a spiritual connection, but I don't expect people would understand that. But at the time I was desperately trying to think of a way we could be together. I will admit there were times I had actually been brave enough to touch her face while she was sleeping during the night. I would often watch her from that computer in my attic and just long to touch her. I knew if I carried on taking so many risks, I was bound to get caught, and I couldn't allow that to happen. The last thing Mrs. Kramer needed was to know that the ghostly activity in her house was not of the paranormal kind. After I returned home that morning, after what you could say was a rather eventful night at the Kramers', where the police had been called on my account, and then Fee had seen me in the early hours of the morning and mistaken me for a ghost. Ostensibly I wasn't in a good way. It was all too close for comfort for me, with the police having come around to the house, and now a psychic medium as well, who would likely check the Kramers' residence for any sign of paranormal activity. I had heard Fee saying that the psychic would be coming around later that afternoon, and I certainly didn't want to be hiding out in the attic when that happened, in case my cover was finally blown. When I returned home, my mother was in quite the state. She was in one of her sizably cranky moods that I always liked to avoid wherever possible. She was bright red in the face, the colour of a tomato, you could say, and then she furiously took me to one side, her eyes as wide as saucers. "What's wrong, Mum?" I asked her, wondering what was up with the woman, because her fleshy jowls jiggled with indignation, for my mother was not a small woman by any manner of means, and there was nothing delicate about her at all. She was not like beautiful Mrs. Kramer, who was slight and elegant like a gazelle. My mother was like an oversized cow. To look at, she was formidable, very unapproachable, you could say, and people never warmed to her easily. She did have one friend, though, who was equally as ungainly as my mother was. The two of them could easily have been mistaken for robust female prison guards, who weren't intimidated by the very worst in our society. "I think your father might be having an affair," she said, her voice sounding thick with anger. "It's a good thing he's not here, or I'd kick him in the balls myself, and he wouldn't be able to walk for a week. Perhaps amputation would be more productive, because that's permanent. If you've got a man sniffing around another woman like a dog on heat, castration isn't a bad idea if you ask me. I could do a good job on your father, let me tell you, but I'm sure he'd squeal like a piglet when I did the dirty deed. But a sharp knife would make it a clean cut, wouldn't it?" I grimaced when my mother said that, suddenly feeling the urgent need to protect the lower parts of my own anatomy, in case they came under my mother's wrath, as when my mother talked like this, I never knew whether she was joking or not, but I preferred to err on the side of caution. I could have told my mother that my father had been doing the dirty on her for 5 long years, and that I was surprised it had taken her this long to finally figure it out. But I kept my lips tightly shut very wisely and said very little. "What makes you think he's having an affair, Mum? I'm sure you've got that wrong. Dad would not cheat on you." "Well, explain this to me then, Michael, will you?" my mother said, with glaring eyes, thrusting one of my father's shirts from out of the laundry basket. "Where the hell did this bright red lipstick stain on his collar come from? Explain that, will you? Look at this, Michael. It's a woman's lipstick mark. And your father's shirt smells of woman's perfume. It reeks to high heaven. Wait until that man comes home. His life won't be worth living," she growled. "He's got some explaining to do." "Oh, that," I said nonchalantly. "That's Mrs. Wollaston's lipstick," I lied, quickly leaping to my father's defence, for the storm brewing in our household needed to be tamed right away before all hell broke loose. Mrs. Wollaston was a woman who worked for my father, overseeing the books and tax returns for his security business. She was in her early 70s and lived alone. Of course, she lived with 100 cats or so that's why she was often referred to as the local catwoman. She always wore a very bright red lipstick to match her red car, and she smelt strongly of perfume. I suspected the excess perfume was to mask the smell of the cats on her person, as I imagine living with 100 cats has got to be a smelly business. It seemed reasonable to suggest the lipstick stain belonged to Mrs. Wollaston. I knew Mum would not feel threatened by the likes of such a woman, so that was a good starting point for me. "How do you know it's Mrs. Wollaston's lipstick?" my mother asked, her dark eyes boring into mine. "How do you know this, Michael?" She waved a finger at me. "If I find out you're covering for your father, I'll kill you myself." "Of course I'm not covering for Dad. I wouldn't do that to you, Mum. I've always got your back," I lied. "Then explain to me, Michael, why Mrs. Wollaston's kissed your father on the collar in the first place. Dear God, your father isn't having an affair with an elderly woman, is he? He wouldn't stoop that low, would he? I've never been able to understand that father of yours, and if he's sniffing around an old lady, I wouldn't exactly be surprised. But Mrs. Wollaston, I'd like to credit my husband with a bit more taste than that." "No, it's nothing like that, Mum," I lied. "Remember I was with Dad the other day, on a job, helping him install some cameras on a property. Don't you remember?" "No, I don't remember. You never told me." "Well, he was wearing that shirt, and Mrs. Wallison came into the house to drop off some books for Dad. Books that she had done. She gave him a hug. She likes Dad a lot. She sees him as a good friend. Nothing more than that. She always hugs him, and she reeks of perfume, doesn't she? I guess when she hugged him, some of her lipstick brushed against his collar. Mrs. Wallison wears a ton of red lipstick. You know what she's like." "No, I don't know what she's like, Michael. And by the sounds of things, it's a good job I don't. I've only met her a couple of times, as it happens. But I had no idea she's taken to hugging your father all the time. What's wrong with the woman?" "I think she's fond of him, that's all. Dad showed me the lipstick mark on his collar, if you must know, and said you better not see it. You might think he was having an affair." My mother looked heartily relieved by my rather flimsy reassurances, and I privately congratulated myself for telling such a tall story so convincingly. I don't know why I protected my father like this from being lamb-blasted by my mother, but I guess I knew his life would not be worth living if he returned home to my mother's unquenchable wrath, as, believe me, you don't want to get on my mother's bad side, and all that mention of my mother amputating his manhood. Well, it gave me an attack of the jitters, let me tell you, as if I would be next on the chopping block. "I should have known your father wasn't cheating on me," my mother said, rolling her eyes as if to chastise herself for her own blind ignorance. "I mean, for goodness sake, who'd find the man remotely attractive? He's desperately unsightly, very unsightly, and if anybody took a whiff of his socks, they'd never want anything to do with him." Under my breath I said, "You'd be surprised, Mum." Thankfully she didn't hear me. What my mother failed to realise was that my father was quite the charmer, and women adored him. But my mother didn't know this because my dad never turned on the charm for her, and my parents' loveless relationship had become dull, certainly as dull as watching paint dry. But they managed to coexist together like a couple of hamsters, and against all odds their miserable marriage just boiled away happily, like a kettle on the hob. My father came home late that night, and he paid my bedroom a visit. At the time I was fast asleep, but I woke up when I felt the pressure at the edge of my bed. My father was sitting down, looking somewhat sheepish as he looked at me. "Sorry, son, I didn't mean to wake you up. I just wanted to say thanks a lot for covering for me. In regards to the lipstick on the collar, if your mum thought for a second I was having an affair, you know what she's like. She'd literally kill me." "Well," I admitted, "she did threaten to cut off your balls, Dad, and I knew we couldn't have that, or I might be next in line," I teased. My father's eyes widened at that. "Don't joke about such things, son. It's not remotely funny. You know your mother. She's as good as her word. So thanks for telling her a big porker and a whopping lie, telling her that I wasn't cheating on her, because right now God knows what chaos this household would be in right now if she were to believe that for a second." "Believe what, Dad? You are cheating on her. Even I know about it," I said. "You haven't exactly been careful over the last 5 years or so. You're lucky Mum's too dumb to notice your shenanigans. You're having an affair, Dad. Don't bother denying it to me. I've known about it for a long time. But don't you worry, your secret's safe with me. You need to be more careful if you don't want Mum finding out. I can't cover for you all the time, Dad. I was quick thinking today, that's all, as Mrs. Wallison wears a ton of red lipstick, and she does hug you all the time. So I was rather creative with my lies today. But not every time will I be so quick on the uptake, let me tell you. Thanks for understanding, son. I'm very appreciative. I am ashamed, of course, to be having an affair. But your mother, you know, she's not very warm, is she? She doesn't even like cuddling me at night. I get lonely in this marriage. I can't remember the last time your mother even so much as laid a finger on me. But I would never divorce her. I'd be too afraid to do that. She'd find me and murder me on the spot. Bury me in the backyard, she would. or someone would find my body lying in a ditch. And I'm not kidding either. Mum is capable of almost anything, Dad. You and I know that. And you're very scared to divorce her, aren't you? And I can't say I blame you on that one. I'm very intimidated by her, and I'm her son. But being married to her, well, that's another story altogether, isn't it? Sometimes I really pity you, Dad. I don't need your pity, son, said my father, nodding soberly. But you're right. When your mother flies off the handle, she goes ballistic, and she becomes quite terrifying. I know, I said. Certainly, Dad, if I was wearing your boots, I'd also not get a divorce. Mum is a hell of a scary woman. You can't get on her wrong side, under any circumstances. It was in the very early hours of the morning that I left my home to return to the Kramer residence. I didn't have to concern myself as a 16-year-old, going walkabout at all hours, because my parents let me come and go as I pleased, and sometimes they barely noticed me at all, and I rather liked it that way. I knew that Mrs. Kramer's teenagers were not at home yet, and Mr. Kramer was thankfully still on business, but I rather suspected Fee, her best friend, would still be staying at the house, giving Mrs. Kramer all that moral support she claimed to need, for she didn't want to be alone after she'd seen my shadow lurking in her bathroom. By this time I was sure the psychic medium had obviously done her investigations and long since left the property, so it would be safe for me to return to the Kramer household. I'd let myself into the house surreptitiously by the sliding doors of the back porch. I had keys to every single room in the house, which was awfully convenient. I liked to go into the house early in the morning, when no one would hear me, because the whole household was sound asleep. I had spent a day away from Mrs. Kramer, and had rarely missed her a whole lot, when she barely knew of my existence, and only assumed the noises from the attic were made by rats. But now she was contemplating that I might just be a ghost, which I did find a tad amusing to a certain extent, for I'd never believed in the paranormal myself. I do remember when I was 16 years old, there were a couple of teenagers in my year who really believed in ghosts. They were passionate about the subject, and were always looking for spooky places to visit that were renowned to be haunted. Some people thought they were off their rockers, including me, of course, but they thought ghosts were real, and would likely be found in old haunted houses and in cemeteries. One day 4 of the boys in my year went off to a cemetery together. It was on a Saturday night, I believe, after hearing that the place was renowned to being haunted, and people in the place had been touched and even pushed around in the cemetery by an unseen pair of hands. That Monday morning one of the boys, called Malcolm Dexter, was so shaken up, so much so that our English teacher, Mrs. Cobbler, asked him what on earth was wrong. He was shaking so violently, as if he was about to have a seizure of some kind, and he had never been like that before. It turned out Malcolm Dexter was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after visiting that cemetery on the Saturday night. Malcolm at first did not say anything at all, as all eyes in the classroom focused on him. Finally, as Mrs. Cobbler was expecting him to say something, he pulled up the sleeves of his school shirt to show everyone in the class. Everybody gasped. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. There were these really dreadful scratches all over him, and they were deep scratches. The teacher was completely confounded. She asked him what the hell had happened to him. The 4 boys told Mrs. Cobbler that they had visited the cemetery that Saturday night. It was supposed to be haunted, they told her. They said one of the crypts in the graveyard they observed was giving off a paradoxical bluish light, which drew them closer and closer to the crypt, and when they approached the light and peeked through the crack, they heard this loud shriek, which freaked them the hell out, for it was such an unearthly sound that shook up every bone in their bodies, rather like a baby's rattle. That was when they observed this dark, shadowy mass that rose up out of the crypt like a billowing black silhouette, which took on a humanoid shape, which did not have any discernible features. This dark mass began to give them chase. They were absolutely terrified, and all 4 boys together ran as fast as they could back to their car that was parked outside the cemetery gate. And when Malcolm got into the car, he felt this burning sensation all over his body. The others in the group appeared to have emerged unscathed from the event, but Malcolm was very badly scratched up. Everyone in the class went quiet, because those deep scratches were not normal. The teacher sent Malcolm to see the school nurse at once. She was worried about his wounds becoming infected. In fact, he was actually later taken to the hospital to get stitches. Some of the cuts on him were treacherously deep, so no one knew what to make of it all. And after that unorthodox event, I guess I became more open-minded about things that go bump in the night. In fact, no one in the class ever questioned the fact that ghosts might be real again. Not after that event. Having said that, it really did not bother me in the slightest going off to the Kramer house in the early hours of the morning to get to the attic, even if it was extremely dark out of doors. I just wanted to be close to Mrs. Kramer again. And yes, I admit, I was obsessed with the woman. My desire to be close to her meant that taking a walk through the woodgrove in the early hours of the morning was the least of my concerns, and absolutely no skin off my nose, even though the memory of Malcolm Dexter's haunting experience in the cemetery did prey on my mind a little, I must admit, and for some reason I began to think about his story as I was scrambling down the footpath through the trees, which wasn't the best time to be thinking about such things, I have to admit. Little did I know that my trip through the woods that night would be a very eventful experience, indeed so indelible I would never be likely to forget it. It was a tenebrific night when I left my house and crossed the road to get to the woods on the opposite side. I was soon sashaying down that trail that in 20 minutes' time would lead to the Kramer's house, although I knew the trip would take a little longer, given how dark it was. I had never once been unsettled by the shortcuts I had taken through the woods to get to the Kramer residence, but on this particular night, something about the woods felt horribly off. Even when I entered them and made my way down that trail, I kept nervously turning around to look over my shoulder, for I was certain that someone was following me. In fact, I was absolutely sure of it. Perhaps I was thinking too much of Malcolm Dexter, I thought. I was carrying a very bright torch with me, which was a very big advantage, and my backpack was on my back, along with my computer case, which was slung rather haphazardly over my shoulders. I'm very glad to say that the bright light of my torch pierced through the darkness, even though the ambiguously lofty shadows of the trees looked extremely menacing, as if in some way they were watching me. "Hello!" I cried out nervously, looking around myself. "Is anybody there? Hello? Hello?" But I was met with silence. The silence was cloying. It was then that I realized what was desperately wrong. I should be hearing the trills of crickets and frogs, shouldn't I? But there was absolutely nothing. Everything was so frantically silent, so disquieting, very disquieting. "Don't be silly," I told myself. "There is nothing there. All this talking about ghosts and the memory of Malcolm describing his attack in the graveyard seemed to have flooded my mind with all kinds of worries. No wonder I was so much on edge. If you exercise those kind of experiences that other people have claimed to have had, was it any wonder I was feeling this unsettled? But there was something about the woods that night, something I cannot put a finger on, but it was something that made every single bone in my entire body begin to tremble, and even my brow was beginning to sweat, and I don't normally sweat like this. I remember I wasn't in a cemetery. I told myself this. There was no crypt. There were no gravestones. I had nothing to worry about. I was in the woods. They were benign. And there was a difference, wasn't there? As I walked down the path, my boots noisily crunched leaf litter and twigs. I didn't like the noise they made. It made me very aware that something could hear me, although I don't know what that something was, but I just got the impression that I was still being followed. I was well aware of the noise I was making, but then I heard it. Someone far heavier than me was behind me, because I could hear the leaves and twigs being crunched. And I had a profound sense that, yes, I was being followed. I wasn't wrong about this at all. And I knew this was not my imagination. It wasn't playing cruel tricks on me. This was really happening, really playing out in my time. I nervously turned around to look behind me again, terrified of what I might see. But nothing was there, and that didn't offer me any relief at all. In fact, it made it all the more worse, because I knew something was behind me. I stepped up my speed as quickly as I could. But then this thing behind me did exactly the same. And so what did I do? I foolishly began to run, because I felt it was my only choice. I was so filled with a desperate sense of panic. Of course, I knew I shouldn't run, especially if I was being stalked by a dangerous predator. But I couldn't help myself, could I? I was so petrified. Someone was behind me. And that was when I heard the strange grunting. It was like nothing I've ever heard before or since. But it confirmed to me my very worst, most terrifying fears. That something was definitely there. In that moment, I realized I was in very grievous danger. Let me assure you that even if you cannot see what is ambushing you, one thing is absolutely certain. You can feel it. From the very moment I had entered the wood grove, the energy towards me had felt hostile, so uninviting, like a bright, big, red danger warning sign, telling you to keep the hell away. But I refused to listen to those gut instincts of mine. And now I might live to regret it, for I was wondering if I'd get out of the woods alive. And that was one hell of a terrifying thought, because I wanted to live. There was so much to live for. I was certain that the Grim Reaper was waiting for me around the very next corner, demanding my soul for his taking. My heart began to boom in my chest, so loudly, in fact, that all the other noises in the wood grove began to be drowned out and almost become inaudible. But I could hear that this thing was still following me, whatever the hell it was. It was getting closer and closer and closer. So I boldly turned around, afraid of what I would see, hoping that I would see nothing. But then I saw it. At first it looked like a dark, gigantic human shadow, and I was convinced it was a ghost. The next thing I knew, this thing grabbed me so violently, and I was flung onto the forest floor by these very powerful arms. I remember screaming, because I knew I was already dead. There was no hope left. All my hope was now expunged. Sometimes when you're caught up in a situation where death is imminent, you surrender to it. And in those seconds I was accepting that this would be my ultimate fate, for this creature that hurled me onto the ground so forcefully was about to kill me. I knew it without a shadow of doubt in my mind. And when I screamed, the creature slapped me across the face and put his hand across my mouth as if to shut me up. My torch was flung onto the ground, but the light it cast literally hovered over the creature, so I could see him very clearly, and when I did, my eyes became as wide as saucers, because I could not believe what I was seeing. It had to be my imagination. This couldn't possibly be real. Ghosts are one thing, but cryptid creatures quite another. The huge monster was staring at me, and I realized that it was a Bigfoot. But there are no words to describe the size of this thing. It was ginormous, covered in thick dark hair, with a profoundly human-like face. I remember he growled warningly at me, as if he dared me to scream again. So I shut up, because he didn't like it when I screamed. His dark treacle-coloured eyes drilled into mine. I tried to look away from those eyes, let me tell you. But he held me down so hard that I couldn't even move, nor could I look away. I was literally under his steady gaze, held hostage to him, and I realized in his powerful arms I could not compete with him. "Please don't kill me," I cried out in vain. "Please, I don't want to die. Please don't hurt me." The Bigfoot's huge hands covered my mouth again. He appeared to want to silence me. He didn't like it when I made any kind of noise. I tried to fight him off, using my legs and arms as defensively as I could, wriggling in any way to set myself free. But it was impossible, and my body suddenly went limp, like an elastic band that has snapped. The Bigfoot bent over me, and he continued to peer straight into my eyes. His dark, treacle-coloured eyes bored into mine, and in that quintessential moment, I felt as if he was looking into the depths of my very soul, seeing everything that I had done in my past, and even what the future might have held for me, if I had any future, that is. I really did try to look away. I tried to continue fighting him, but there was no point. Those dark eyes held me hostage, but then something happened, something very strange that I could not fathom. My whole world went absolutely black, and I remember nothing else. Imagine my immense surprise when I woke up the following morning, feeling both disorientated and extremely confused, wondering if the events of the previous evening had been an illusory dream. Someone was shaking me hard. "Are you all right?" I heard this elderly woman asking me. "You gave me quite a shock, lying outside my front door like this. For a moment I thought you were dead. It was a terrifying thing to find you here, but I'm so glad you're all right. Well, at least I hope you are. You do look a little dishevelled, I must say. Please do come in. I'll make you a cup of hot sweet tea if you like." "What happened?" I asked the old lady, looking bemused. "Well, I don't know, dear. I thought you could tell me, perhaps." Before long, the kind elderly lady made me some hot tea, and she cooked me a breakfast of bacon and eggs, which was incredibly kind of her, because I was famished. And when I realized where I was, the events of the previous night, or early hours of the morning, should I say, came straight back to me. I couldn't comprehend why I was still alive. I was so sure that the Bigfoot was going to kill me, but he didn't. And that is the strange thing about all this. Why didn't he kill me? "I like your necklace, young man," said the woman, leaning forward to examine it. "I do believe that's an eagle's feather. I've got a fixation over eagles, you know." I glanced down on my neck, and to my surprise I really was wearing a leather thong, with an eagle's feather on it, along with a strange amulet. It was pretty cool, I have to say, but I didn't put it on me. So it must have been the Bigfoot. But why would he do something like that? It was decidedly strange, I thought. I realized in that moment that the creature probably had meant me no harm after all, for had that been the case, I would already be dead. Imagine my surprise when I discovered my computer case and my backpack were unharmed. They were lying at the woman's front door, next to where she found me in a crumpled heap. So when the Bigfoot had attacked me, he'd brought me to this old lady's house for some reason, along with my belongings. Even my torch was there, lying precariously on its side, but I could see it was seriously damaged. The glass was cracked, and I would never be able to use it again. But that was a small price to have to pay. I was at least in one piece. For a long time I couldn't fathom what had happened to me that night, and for many years I rather thought very reflectively about the paradoxical incident, wondering why my strange interaction with this rather indignant Bigfoot had not ultimately ended in my death, and why the unorthodox creature had given me an attractive leather thong to wear around my neck. I guess some questions as enigmatic as they may be, simply cannot be answered. One bizarre thing that did occur, though, my fixation on Mrs. Kramer completely dissolved, like an effervescent tablet in a glass of water. I know my attachment to her was extremely bizarre, very strange, and when I think about it, I almost cringe. But after my Bigfoot encounter, that bedazzlement I had towards Mrs. Kramer faded away. These days, I'm a very happily married man, very much in love with my beautiful wife, and I have 2 children. I've told my wife about how I hid in a woman's attic, simply because I was so fixated over her. I told her that the attraction I had towards Mrs. Kramer was not of a sexual nature. My wife emphatically believes I was longing for a mother figure in my life, and saw Mrs. Kramer as someone who could fulfill that role for me. My mother had never been a nurturing person towards me. Never once had she told me she loved me, and I had always been a bitter disappointment to her, and probably still am. I never went back to the Kramers' house after the Bigfoot encounter. I never returned to the attic, and I sometimes wonder if they ever thought anything more about the strange ghostly activity in their home. But I don't think they ever realized the haunting was actually a human one, and nothing outer-worldly was ever going on in their home. But as far as I'm concerned, some lids are best kept tightly closed. These days my parents still live together, like 2 hamsters, and my father is currently having an affair with another woman. He still hangs out in the yard shed, making secret phone calls to her, but he needs to be careful. My mother is always waiting in the wings with an axe at the ready to amputate his manhood if need be, so he should be very careful. I wouldn't put anything past my mother. She's capable of anything. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.